Well, hey, thanks for joining. This is Wesley Smith with the Tree Service Marketing Profits podcast. And today we're doing a quick episode with Jim Cortese. He's an expert in the plant healthcare field and is one of our our sequence of interviews with experts in the tree care industry, people who know their stuff, been in the business for decades, and really can share some value with our audience and our listeners. So today, if you're on YouTube watching this as a recording, go ahead and like and subscribe to our channel. We got plenty more content coming up with experts with interviews and marketing content coming up for free for you. We've got a new local service ads, a Google guaranteed webinar coming up next week. That'll be on YouTube as well. And if you're on the podcast, like and subscribe to your favorite podcast. We're on every one of the major platforms, Amazon, Spotify, Apple, etc. So I wanted to welcome Jim Cortese. Jim, how you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
That's awesome. You bet. I appreciate you joining. A lot of people are going to get some value from what you have to share today. So let's go ahead and get started with kind of how you started in the tree business back in the 1970s and kind of what led you up to today.
I got a degree in forestry. And when I graduated, and I'm giving you the abbreviated for this, but I graduated and I was going to do something with trees. And I had spent a summer with the Forest Service in California and later in Montana. And that gentleman that I had mentioned earlier, Nat Dunn, who attended my father's lecture in Memphis because he was a newspaper writer, wanted to meet me and give me information on Mauger tree injector units and how to appraise the value of a tree. I went to the summer camp with the Forest Service and used these kids sitting in a summer camp as a sounding board all summer long about this newfangled idea of giving trees shots. Right. And near the end of the summer, one of the kids says, Cortese, you really ought to go back to Tennessee and do something with these tree injectors you've been blathering about all summer. It was a crucial moment that it all sort of made sense to me. And I said, you're right, I need to do that. So I came back to Knoxville, and being an average student, I had one more quarter in those days to attend to get my degree. And so I took every undergraduate entomology and plant pathology class I could take, realizing that if I was going to do something with trees, I need to understand about tree insects and tree diseases and that type of thing.
Sure.
I graduated in December. This Nat Dunn had a seminar scheduled to be in near the end of February of '77 in Memphis. He had one person, in addition to myself, signed up for that seminar. I was antsy. I wanted to get on with my career, and I found out that there was another seminar in Dallas, Texas on February 2nd of 1977. So I borrowed my older brother's car and drove from Memphis to Dallas, Texas. And when I left Dallas, Texas that day, I was the Mauger Company's new distributor for their products for Eastern Tennessee, Western North Carolina, and parts of Kentucky. So between the 2nd of November and the 28th of November, part of my agreement was that I was going to put on a seminar in Knoxville on the 28th, and I would have 20 people, including professors from the University of Tennessee, in attendance.
Wow. So you had started at a small conference, learned all of what you needed to learn about these injections and things like that for tree service, tree care. And then now you're putting on the meeting coming up.
I'm putting on the meeting.
Okay.
And so I pulled that off, but you still have a cash flow issue. In fact, my one message to anybody in business, be it tree business or anything else, is that cash flow is king. If you have no cash flow, you're dead in the water.
Good tip. Yeah.
I came back to Knoxville. I rented an office. I lived in my office. I did not have an apartment or anything. I literally found a guy who would rent me a room in the upstairs of his business. He put in a shower in the bathroom. He put a refrigerator in the bathroom. And I had about a 13 by 13 room that was where a little desk I had with a hot plate in the corner. And that was the beginning of Cortese Tree Specialists. I looked around Knoxville in February at all the what do people with a degree in trees do in the city, and everybody advertised that they top trees. And I knew that that's kind of like having a hangnail. Let's see if I can get my finger in here. Where? Oh, there.
Yeah, there you go.
Having topping a tree. my goodness, I thought this would be pretty simple.
Yeah, there you go. You get
Anyway,
yeah.
you show your finger. Topping a tree is like cutting your finger off at the knuckle and
Right.
saying, thanks, docs, I appreciate you taking care of the pain of the hangnail that was bothering me, which is why I came to see you. And he's quite happy with that. Well, people are always looking to get trees topped, and it's stupid. At that same time, Alex Shigo, who I consider to be the father, most people consider him the father of modern arboriculture, he gave a lecture at Michigan State University in Ann Arbor in the fall of 1978. And I happened to be sitting at a table next to him before he became who he became. And he said something to me at that meeting. He said, if you're going to inject trees, make the wounds as small and as shallow as possible. But we will have arrived when we're able to move chemicals and materials through the bark of the tree and the lentil cells within the bark of the tree. Well, I didn't know what a lentil cell was, and I was still in the process of assimilating, injecting materials into the sap stream, the most recent year or two's growth ring of the tree to control insects, diseases, whatever. I also, because of this cash flow issue, is that February is not, people aren't injecting trees and they're not doing anything with that. It's a terrible time to start a business. And so I had to do something to pay the bills. And that room that I had was costing me $125 a month, and the gas in my car that I bought in Montana for $287 needed gasoline. I had a station wagon, a 67 Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser, and I used to put brush in the back of it and haul it around. It was my first tree truck. Anyway.
Well, it's safe to say you were all in at that point, Jim. I mean, you were operating your business. Operating the business out of the office and then living out of the office at the same time.
There was no going back. It was sink or swim. And when one is faced with it, if you're going to go into something, you go into it whole hog, 100%, because you have no backup. You have to go forward.
Completely agree. Yeah.
Anyway, that's how I started. I looked around. I knew how to prune shrubbery. I'm a freehand tree climber even to this day. I know how to use ropes and saddles, and I recommend that if you're going to do this profession, that you learn to do it properly with ropes and saddles and all the safety gear that's there. But in those days in 77, I was a freehand climber. I'd climbed trees all my life with no ropes or saddles or anything else. In fact, my stint with the Forest Service in Northern California in the Six Rivers National Forest, I spent my off time going through the Jedediah Smith redwood forest looking for a redwood tree that I could freehand climb. And it took me all summer to do so, but I found five trees in a row, and the littlest two were side by side, and I could squeeze up between them, and I got into the next to the smallest one and went to the top of it, and it interlocked with the branches of the third tree, and I went to the top of it, and I kept crossing over until I got into the big mama, and I climbed to the top of that tree, or within about 15 foot of the top. I learned that all the tops of the redwood forest in that park were dead, the upper 15 foot. And that was in 74, I believe it was.
How tall were these redwood trees, would you estimate?
I went back the next day with a measuring tape and a planometer and measured as close as I could. And that tree was 310 foot tall, give or take 15 feet. And it was roughly 32 feet in circumference.
Wow, that's humongous. Those are the ones that they actually have where the car drives through, some of them out there in California.
Yes, in fact, one of my ancestors, one of my great grandmothers in the 1920s, is a picture of her with friends that had just come through that tree.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I love trees. That's how I got into this. I looked for things that I could do in a tree. As a freehand climber, I climbed small trees. I went down to the Sears store. I bought a pole saw, an electric chainsaw, a pair of hand snips, rope. I did not have a saddle at that time. Rakes. I bought the things that I thought I would need, and I became a walking, talking public relations man. And he who doesn't toot his own horn, his horn doesn't get tooted.
That's the 10-foot rule, Jim. Anybody within 10 foot knows what you do, how you do it, and when you do it. Yeah.
Well, you get involved in the community, because the more you get involved in the community, the more They call on you because you told them what you do, and suddenly they need a tree taken care of. And so anyway, I had to learn the hard way how to climb a tree properly, because in the early days, I hired and subcontracted trees bigger than I could handle to I went through every tree company in the Knoxville market in those days. Remember, this is 77, 78, and 79. And when I couldn't do it, I would hire somebody or have them come give me a bid on it, and I would listen to them, and I would then add $100 or $200 to the job, and I would bill the client and pay them and keep $200 for myself. And,
Right.
but I would watch them and how they operated and how they did these things. I'm self-taught. I wasn't Davey. I wasn't Bartlett. I had nobody that I had ever worked from. I had a degree in forestry. I had book knowledge and understanding of trees and tree biology. So anyway, in order to learn how to do this, you hired people, you watched what they did, and finally I settled on some old hillbillies, the B&D Tree Service, and this was old arboriculture. We had climbing spikes and old manila ropes, and that's how I learned to climb trees. Then, as I said, Shigo came along in 78. He changed the game. I went back to trees in the early 80s that I had pruned with climbing spikes in the early days, and saw these big funky wounds where it had sap had oozed, and I scraped it away, and you could see these little triangular points on the top of branches, which begs the question, why do trees fall on golf courses? It's because they always hired the cheapest people around to prune their trees, and they always used climbing spikes in those days. And a wound plus time equals decay, and 10 years down the road, you've had that 10 years of that decay moving in through the climbing spike wound. Then you could have a bird land on the tree or a caterpillar land on the tree, and suddenly the tree just breaks. Well, that wound is on the upper side of those branches, and they literally break off. I've watched this through the School of Hard Knocks over the years. I had a big oak, a big silver maple in front of my later office, and I literally watched Shigo's theory of compartmentalization take place, because I would wound the tree, and then I would watch the rotten decay and the new callus tissue callus over the wound. But you could literally watch this decay progressing as it ended up as a hollow tree. My joke was is that if I died early, that they could cut the tree down and stick me in it and plant me.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I want to go back just a little bit. That's very interesting and a lot of added value there for what you just shared. I appreciate that. So we'll go back to, so you started the Cortese Tree Specialist, and that was just kind of a, word of mouth. You're going to tell everybody you're the evangelist of the tree service and tree care. And you went out and you're watching people, how they prune trees, trim trees, remove trees, and things like that.
But these were the people that I subcontracted.
Exactly. And that's who you learned
until I hit the B&D Tree Service. And then I hired Gene Bird. Those guys were what they called nickel and dimers. By the time you get to September, October, November, they didn't have any work to do, and they would stay with no work to do until April or May.
Which is a key point, because a lot of people are in that boat today.
They are. And so I learned that you had to pre-sell takedowns for the wintertime. And I tried never to do a takedown right now. I always tried to sell them to be done in the wintertime. And somewhere around 79 or 80, I had a really good backlog of takedowns. And so I went to this guy, Gene Bird, with the B&D Tree Service. I said, I'd like you to consider coming to work with me in my business. And he taught me how to climb a tree. I never saw him climb a tree. He never climbed a tree, but his nickname was Snuffy because he always had his mouth full of
dip, stuff.
Full of nastiness.
Yeah.
Anyway, he was a wonderful fellow, and he taught me how to safely climb trees with a rope and saddle, old school. And so that's how we got started. I found out early on, I tried all kinds of advertising and things to do. And I consider it something that if somebody has a tree service or a landscape service or a lawn care service, if you want to promote your business, you got to quit using a shotgun and use the high-powered rifle. Now, what is the high-powered rifle? The high-powered rifle is to promote yourself in anything locally in a community that has anything to do with the arts. If you're in the arts, The people who have expendable cash, excess money that would like to have high quality work done, they support the arts. And I don't care what community in America it is, that's where they hang out. And they will support the people who support the arts. It could be dance, it could be theater, it can be art galleries, it can be opera, it can be symphony. My favorite was the symphony and the opera, because the people who have excess expendable cash, they support those types of art
Yeah, that's a very,
programs.
very valuable share right there, Jim. I want anybody watching this to rewind at about 1 minute and start back where Jim started with that, because that makes a lot of sense. Those people have disposable income. Those people are local, wealthy people in the community typically. And if you hang out in those circles, they want this type of work done where you're saving trees or shaping the trees correctly, things like that, you know?
The other thing, Wes, that correlates with that is that if you're going to be in business, you got to play the game properly. That means you got to get your licenses.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have insurance. You have to have the things that you got to have, because that gives people security. There's enough people out there without these things that by teaching people proper arboriculture and how to take care of trees properly, those people told other people, and the word of mouth progress began. I never missed trying to talk to garden clubs, civic clubs, Rotaries, Kiwanis, Lions, Civitans, any of those things. And it doesn't matter what you talk to them about, but I like to talk to them about how decay progresses in a tree and why tree topping hurts, because those were things that in every community you see it. And I'll also throw out another little subtle thing, but if you go into any city in America, small town, big town, and you want to know where the poor section is and where the well-to-do is, look for where the topping is. If you see topping, you're going to be in a poor section of town, because the poor people seem to not have any control over much, and so they spend their time cutting the whack the tops out of their trees.
Mm-hmm.
The more well-to-do, because they're a little bit more educated normatively, they don't have as much topping. It's not that there won't be, but there's less of it. And so,
Well, good tip. That's a great tip. So as you were building the Cortese Tree Specialist over the years, over the decades, that kept building word of mouth. You became the expert in Knoxville for tree care and things like that. And then simultaneously, you were launching Tipco, which now you're the owner and consulting arborist of the chemicals and the spraying and the fertilization of trees.
I started three things in '77. I started Tipco, which then was called Mojay Southeast or something like that, but it's the same company. I started the Cortese Tree Specialist in March of that year. And by the end of the year, I was also working as a consulting arborist, because I was an expert witness in a very large court case in the Knoxville area. I still do all three of those things. At some point right now, I spend most of my time writing reports for attorneys and insurance companies on tree related issues. I spend the other half of my time telling people about plant health care and why they need to be doing it. You know, everybody in the world is in the tree pruning business, and they're all concerned about only they can prune a tree. And you can't grow a tree until you get out. You can't grow your tree business until you get out of the trees. You know what that means?
Sure.
It means that as long as you're the only climber that's out there, you don't have time to go be selling your tree work and what you're all about. And so once you get out of the trees, you can concentrate on managing the business and treating it as a business. If I had one claim to fame, it's the fact that when I started the business, the tree business in Tipco, I treated them as businesses, and I applied business practices to those businesses. And one of the key ingredients of that is keeping records. So many people that I've run into, their filing system is on the dashboard of their car, and they can never find anything. I have records on every tree I ever worked at going back to February of '77, and I can tell you how much income came through the door from then until now, until December of 2013, when I sold Cortese Tree to the Davey Corporation. Tipco, the same thing. I can go back to the early days and I can create a listing of how much has been sold month by month and who bought it, etc. That's important data. If you want to project your business into the future, you got to look and see what was happening in the past. And what that did for me is in the early days of the business, somewhere in the, I guess, the early 80s, I discovered that there's a W form to business in the tree business. The first is that I had to have enough jobs sold by the 1st of July to carry me through till the end of the mid to the end of August. Because if I didn't have those jobs sold, I was going to be high and dry. The second thing is you around the 1st of September, you start a big run and you run until probably the 1st of December. You had to start backlogging none of those trees that I take downs. I would start pre-selling them to be taken down in the wintertime, because you have this ebbs and flows throughout the season. And the only way that you can keep your cash flow is you keep your employees. There's nothing worse than having employees and then suddenly you have no work for them. And if you have no work for them, then they're going to go someplace else, and your efforts at training them is just falling on quicksand.
Yeah, and we do hear that from time to time. But I want to also just hit on a point that you just had alluded to a minute ago, as far as keeping a database of your clients, the addresses, the work you've done, everything you've done for those clients. We harp on this a lot with our clients we're doing marketing for. And it's because you want to build up that database of your customers, because you want to build a fence around those people. You know, you can actually market to them with email newsletters. You can have intelligent conversations with them down the road because you remember what you did in the past for them. So that's very, very important.
And that's so important, because the next time you come there, you can pull your file out and you can say, oh, I was there 3 years ago. And especially if you're dealing with plant health care, you need to know what you treated and what you treated it with. And you can put notes as to, if later, if you're checking out, you can tell how you did with it. And it gives you all kinds. You know how many people you had on the crew on that site and who they were. You could even send the same crew back out if they're still with you. And that gives people a sense of security also.
That's great. That's a good point too. And so you built Cortese Tree Specialist, and were building the chemicals and that side of the business as well. You were very busy during that time frame, it sounds like, and kind of got it to where you were a well-known tree service specialist there in the Knoxville area, Cortese Tree Specialist. And then when did you kind of look to possibly sell the company, or did that kind of happen by accident, or were you seeking out a buyer for your company?
Well, let's just put it this way. I built the company on three things: excellence in arboriculture, tree topping herbs, and I don't remember what the third one was. But anyway, by the time we built it up, those were all marketing employees, because as we talked about, to try and have public relations. And it's not because I consider myself brilliant, but I've always been very good at utilizing other people's good ideas better. And specifically to your question of selling, I've got 4 children. And the lesson of the grandfather, that's my grandfather, is that he wanted his sons to be doctors. And so my uncle, my father's brother, became an optometrist, and my father flunked out of medical school because he absolutely detested being a doctor. So then he went into newspapering. I raised my kids sort of along the same line of my father, and that is that they have their own passions. And if their passions line with mine, then I would love to have them come work with me in the tree business and what I'm doing. But I would be happier for them to be enjoying their own passions, because it's better to be a poor man doing something that you love than a rich man doing something that you detest and hate every day of the week. Mm-hmm. So anyway, when it got to be 2013, there was another tree company here in town, the Wolf Tree Service, which was primarily a utility line service. They did do some residential work, but Davey bought them up, maybe 4 or 5 years, 6 years before they approached me. And they did approach me, and I thought about it. And since none of my children had any interest in trees, there was no sense in perpetuating that, because the plant health care business and consulting was consuming much of my time. And so I was open to them buying the business. But that's how we got to it. I was actually hoping to get a little bit of a competition between Davey and Bartlett, but I couldn't get Bartlett interested.
Oh yeah, no, we've seen Davey Tree Company. They're humongous. We see them at the TCIA Expo, and Bartlett as well. So that's a testament. If you run a good, tight ship tree company, you're doing good revenues. You've got a good, rated business, and it's well respected around the community. Then one day that's going to be an option for you if you do decide that you want to sell your business and get out of it, or do something else, or maybe do something a little bit less, maybe less risky, less, easier type work, consulting type work, because now you're the expert, right? And so that's why now you kind of transition more into the plant health care and Tipco.Green.
I spend all of my time mentoring other people to www.tipco.green, and I'm Jim at Tipco.Green. So anyway, I'm very happy to help anybody anywhere if you're wanting to learn about plant health care. I always recommend that you never turn a job down. If you're a small guy and you say, I'd like to think about it someday, one of the issues is that someday never gets here.
Yeah.
And if you start taking those little jobs, and if you're looking around at someone's yard and you see aphids on their tulip poplar tree that you just pruned, you can suggest, well, would you like me to take care of this problem for you? And so I would take care of that problem for them. And it became ultimately your tree pruning, general tree pruning of trees was about 45% of what we did. Tree takedowns was about 25 to 30% of what we did. And the rest of it was plant health care. And there were a few other things like cable embracing and lightning rod installations were maybe a little bit, but I'd say on average, the plant health care was around 15 to 18% of everything that we did. And we did liquid root fertilizing. We used treated trees for insects, disease problems,
Yeah.
anything along those lines. And it spread out into shrubbery. I mean, shrubs get their problems too, and they need to be taken care of. And you can set up programs to come in and monitor people's yards, and then charge them so much per month to monitor their yards, and then have a specific fee, because you can learn what the average types of insects and diseases in a particular community. Go to the Ag Extension Service if you're unsure about what problems are in your area. Ag Extension is in every county in America.
Ag Extension, okay.
Every county, Knox County Agriculture Extension Service. I consider probably to be the best governmental private service that's ever been created by America, because they not only help you with landscaping and horticulture and tree issues, but they're in the home service and helping people to keep their homes up and take care of their homes. They're a plethora of information. They have nominal fees. They're tied into the state pesticide identifications, insect identification and disease identification. They're the ones who oversee you getting pesticide applicator licenses and that type of thing.
Okay, well, great. Yeah. And so what would you say? We're gonna share all of your contact information too at the end of the meeting, and put it in the show notes for the podcast, so people can reach out to you if they have any questions, or if they want consulting help from you. What would you say? Would you say plant healthcare really sort of took off in what decade do you think? Did it start building kind of momentum in the 80s and 90s? Or how did that kind of go from?
It probably, the decade of plant healthcare was probably started in the mid to late 80s.
Okay.
Caught feet in the early 90s. And I'm trying to think of what they called it.
Yeah, things kind of evolve, and the names.
There was another name that they used for it. Because there's another plant healthcare, and was an evolution. And in fact, I consider one of the Shigo revolutions is that it was an offshoot of him changing how we deal with decay in trees and how trees rot and decay, which changed the fact that prior to that, everybody used climbing spikes, and now they
Hmm.
all they use ropes and saddles and learned how to move in a tree without those climbing spikes. And you only use a climbing spike on a dead tree. Well, right now we're in a period when there is a revolution in fertilizers because we've been dumping so much nitrogen on grounds and yards and places for generations and generations, going back to the 30s and 40s. And now you can actually go up to a tree well, let me just, normatively, if you're going to quote liquid root fertilize a tree, and I say fertilize a tree, not feed a tree. Feeding is a poor description of what's happening. You're putting minerals into the soil so that the tree then can utilize that to grow better. You can grow a tree to death with nitrogen. Nitrogen is not the answer. It's all the microbes and the other beneficial things that are in the soils today. And many of these fertilizer companies are evolving to reduce the amount of nitrogen and include uh, more micronutrients and minerals, as well as microbes and other beneficial biological critters. And I'm having a senior moment here. I can't think of the phrase I'm wanting, but
Oh, there's so many different ones. Yeah, no
yes,
problem.
there are a lot of them out there.
Hmm.
Anyway, it's a wonderful science, and if you want healthy trees, you're going to have healthy soil. And so if you're dealing with trees, you're not just dealing with trees, you're dealing with it. I'm going to share with my greatest pet peeve. I have a pet peeve. I hate pot grown trees. I've never seen a pot grown tree that doesn't end up having girdling roots. If you want a good tree, you go to a nursery where they grow trees in the field. You pick out the trees that are the nicest looking trees, and you put a dot on one side, north, south, east, or west, and you then transplant that tree to your yard and reacclimate it so that that dot is north, south, east, or west, the same direction it was in the nursery. And you will never have sun scalding or anything like that, because it's like having a sunburn. You sit covered up all winter long. In that early spring, you might even get it for mid-March, and it gets one of those warm days where it gets up to 45, but you feel like it's 95, and so you take your coat off, and suddenly you get sunburned on
Sure.
your arms and your neck. Well, you take a tree and it's been growing one direction all of its life, and you turn it around, and that side that was away from the sun, it gets sunburned. The girdling roots within the pots, they claim that they start them in a small pot, then move them to a bigger pot, then move them to a bigger pot. Every tree that I have ever seen has severe girdling roots inside of it. Once a root is trained to grow in a circle, a tree's not going to live. Why do the trees in city? They say they average 7 years to 9 years. 7 years, I think, was an average from a research article done about 25 years ago. It's because we're putting crap into the ground, and then look at where we plant these trees. We plant them in pots. Here in Knoxville, have these big road projects where they come in and they're putting in new sidewalks and all this, and they create these little places for trees out in the middle of the road. Well, they've made the road and they packed that soil down so that you can't get through it, and then they put a barrier around that so that it looks like a place for the soil, and they dump all the garbage in there and stick this poor tree that was pot grown, and then it fails after 5 or 8, 9 years.
I've seen them
Well,
around here in my area. Yeah, there's a sidewalk, and then there'll be a little skinny area with dirt and grass, and they'll literally plant one in between the two concrete barriers. I mean, it seems like that it just doesn't have enough room to breathe at that point. The roots to move around.
there's lots of opportunity. We haven't talked about employees. I
Hmm.
was always really happy because I had people when I sold Cortese Tree in 2013 that had been with me for 25 and 30 years.
Wow.
And to me, I always took a lot of pride for that. I also the company was located in a poor neighborhood, which is now gentrified in Knoxville. But one of the things I always took honor in is the fact that there were some kids that grew up in that rundown neighborhood that ended up becoming crew foremen for my company. And we're darn good at it. But you got to play all ends against the middle to get good employees. And you're going to go through 3 or 4 before you get one that stays. And that is just the way it is. You can't just get somebody and expect them to survive. You have to train them. You got to work with them and make them feel valued and that they have a life with you. And it's more than, they're not just tree monkeys out there doing a job. You have to teach them to become skilled craftsmen. The guy that ran my plant healthcare, he ultimately became a skilled craftsman. In fact, I consider him the only person who could prune a tree better than me in a bush. But it's because he took pride in what he was doing, and I would harp on him to refine it and make it look good. But he was a technician. He was a skilled technician in what he was doing, a craftsman. And so you have to train them. But remember this, college students need to be hired also. And there's nothing wrong with hiring someone smarter than you. Back in '81, I hired a guy who was teaching me. He was working on his PhD in plant pathology at UT. And he married a lady from the near outside of Knoxville, but near Knoxville. And she didn't want to live anywhere else. And there weren't very many jobs for a PhD plant pathologist in Knoxville. And so I hired my former teacher to be a sales rep for me here in Knoxville. He got mad at me because I made him go learn to climb a tree first. I didn't want him to become a skilled tree climber, but until you touch trees, until you go out and do that, it helps you take what you know and look and see things in a tree to be able to deal with them more efficiently.
Right, become a more well-rounded tree expert at that point. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, he lasted with me for 2 years, and then he took a job as the first urban forester for the city of Savannah, Georgia, at twice the $18,000 that I was paying, which was, to me, $18,000 then. That was it was more money than I could ever see.
Yeah, inflation adjusted, it's probably 4x that now, right? It's probably paying somebody 80 or 100 grand. Yeah,
it's a lot more than it was then, for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, this is awesome. Great shares with that, Jim. I appreciate that. So
high school kids, I can't get leave before I tell them about that. They're the opposite end of the spectrum. You go to a school, and every guidance counselor in a high school knows that most people are into computers, but there is a group out there that they're not interested in computers.
Oh, absolutely.
They want to do something with their hands. And if you can talk to the guidance counselors, they know all those kids and they can tell you who the good ones are. And reach out to them because they're looking for a career. They want something they can do with themselves. That's a darn good place to find employees.
Well, great point. I mean, not everybody can be a desk jockey or computer type engineer or worker. There's a lot of people that do like blue collar things and working with their hands. So that's a good resource. Local high schools, trade schools, things like that. It's a great share with that. So this has been very eye-opening. So anybody listening, make sure you kind of go back and listen to some of these high points about hiring good individuals, training people, investing in your people, where to find local tree service clients, at the arts places and things like that. All of these have been great shares and unique perspectives from somebody that's been in the business since the mid 70s. So almost 50 years. So a wealth of knowledge there, Jim. If people are in the tree service business, and I'm not sure exactly, do you consult with those tree service business owners on how to best provide plant health care in their local market and then also have the products for them as well?
I've been doing it for 50 years now.
Well, that's awesome.
I like to think that I started out as a poor boy. I didn't have any capitalization and I had to squeeze blood from turnips. And I feel like that my road to success is a road that anybody can do. They just have to pay attention to the details and they can do it.
That's right. And that's why I wanted to have you on. I think this is a very timely interview and topic and discussion because we have a lot of clients that are getting into that side of the business or want to market for that side of the business in their local markets. And we're doing that for them. And we're marketing for different keywords rather than just tree trimming or tree removal and things like that. We're going after plant health care, fertilization, saving trees, different keywords other people are typing in. And so I wanted to get an expert on the show that basically knows that side of the business. This has been great, Jim. A lot of valuable points that you've shared today, a lot of value for our listeners. If somebody wants to reach out to you, I know you mentioned, I know you're the owner and consulting arborist with Tipco.Green. And what's your email address, if you don't mind, and we'll put it on the show notes and the YouTube video.
All right. The Tipco's webpage is www.tipco. That's TIPCO.green, the color green. We're the only green company in America. I am at Jim@Tipco.Green.
Awesome. So guys, there you have it. If you got any questions,
you can order any of these things online.
I saw that. Yeah.
I have spent, we're like a grocery store for plant health care. And part of what you get is you get me mentoring and you get me answering questions. I've always I have a strong feeling for the small guy, but we work with big companies too. And I've actually will go in and put on training sessions for plant health care sales reps, because plant health care cannot be separated from your sales reps. A lot of the big guys don't seem to understand that. You can't have a plant health care technician out there just suddenly doing things. You've got to have a buy-in from the owner. You have to have a buy-in from all sales reps, because those sales reps are going out selling tree work and takedowns and pruning. And if they do not understand plant health care, then they're leaving money on the table. That's all there is to it. And there's so many people. One of the things that I love to do is to actually go visit some of their like particular companies, high-end clients. And my job is to look around and see where they've been leaving money on the table. We don't talk about this in front of the client, but it allows me to go see what their people are seeing and not seeing. Sort of like if you write a report on something, the teacher comes back and grades it and hands it back with all the checks and circles around places where they could have done better. Well, I do the same thing with sales reps, because sales reps, if they have their own blinders on.
Sure.
They sell what they have learned. And if they learn tree topping, that's what they're going to sell, which that isn't as much of an issue today as it was 30 years ago. But if they don't know anything about plant health care, they can't sell plant health care because they're not involved in it. Going back to Ag Extension, they have brochures and pamphlets on every insect and disease in any community to help your people learn what those things look like. They may not tell you exactly how to solve it, but what I found is that my mother always said there's more than one way to skin a cat. And in the early days, everything was just Tree Tech or just Mojay, but then you have ArborJet, you have Arbor Systems, you have Rainbow, you have all these people who produce wonderful products. And the efficacy of these is they all work. They just have different degrees of complexity in how they work. And I feel like that it took me 20 years to break from being just Mojay to being able to look rationally at what other products have. And most companies that produce products have certain products that are better than others. It's not that the other ones that aren't as good don't work. It's just they usually have a product that is really, really state of the art in that particular. And that's sort of like their beast that they rest upon. The other, it carries some of the others. But my job is to help you know what some of those things are.
Well, there you go, guys. That's a wealth of knowledge there. And if you have any questions, or if you're looking to add that line of business onto your existing tree service business, Jim's a wealth of knowledge. Has got 5 decades in the business, can really help coach you on what would be the best methods and best practices in your local area to help with those trees and things like that too. So Jim, I know your time is very valuable. I want to thank you again for coming on today. Maybe we can have you on a future episode. If you see any kind of trends coming up, anything that you would like to share, some valuable insights on, what you're seeing, we'd be more than happy to have you back, and you can kind of let us know what those look like and kind of stay on, because I know you're on the forefront of this, right? You got your finger on the pulse.
Next time we'll just focus on a small part of it instead of a general swath. We'll just deal with it and one or two issues.
Okay.
Maybe we can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. We can focus on something, narrow it down a little bit. I think, hearing your backstory is very interesting too. And a lot of people are just getting started in the business, or maybe they're 10 years into the business, 20 years into the business. So, really hearing from a veteran, somebody who's been there, done that, sold a company.
I'll have to share with you. I remember taking in school and looking at the names of chemicals and trees like a tulip poplars, a liriodendron tulipifera. And I sat there and looking at the names of chemicals, imidacloprid, dinitrofuran, and it makes you wonder. I always thought that they stick people in a room someplace and say you can't come out till you come up with some weird name. Think about medical pills and stuff that you.
Oh yeah, they're
they're all. It's just like, where do they come up with all these things?
That's right. That's right. Well, I really appreciate you coming on today, Jim. And I'll have all of your contact information in the show notes on the YouTube video and on the podcast in the show notes for that part. So it's Tipco.Green, guys, and then Jim at Tipco.Green for a consulting arborist, somebody who can help you with the plant healthcare side of the business. One-stop shop, grocery store, as he indicated on the website, with anything that you need for plant healthcare for your local area. And guys, again, I wanted to ask, if you're on the YouTube channel watching this as a replay, please like and subscribe to our channel. We've got more expert interviews coming up down the road, and a new local webinar about local service ads on the Google Guaranteed side of things. If you're on the podcast, listen to the audio, like and subscribe to your favorite player. And until next time, we will see you then on the next episode. Have a good day.
Thank you.